The night I knew something was off didn't start with fireworks. It began with a sound I'd heard 1,000 times, the soft clink of a glass against a table, and the hush that follows when people expect a toast. Candles flickered in the restaurant's mirrors, catching in the sequins of Zara's red dress, and the confident smile Bryce wore like a medal. He squeezed my hand as if we were the picture of certainty, while a photographer circled for the perfect shot. The air smelled like warm butter and citrus, and someone somewhere laughed a little too loud. I watched Bryce tilt his head toward the crowd, collecting attention the way some men collect trophies. For a moment, I saw us as strangers might polished lucky meant to be. Then I felt the tiniest shift inside, the kind you can't explain yet, like a door somewhere in the house of your life just came unlatched. Before I continue, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever ignored that first small warning your heart tried to give you. Don't forget to like and subscribe if these stories of truth and justice keep you company at bedtime. My name is Camille, and I was raised in a house where dinners were eaten at a table, not a screen, and apologies were spoken out loud. My father came home with the smell of machine oil on his hands, and the kind of patience you learn from measuring twice and cutting once. And my mother kept a basket of greeting cards ready for births and funerals, because that's what community meant. I worked my way from a state university to a downtown firm that measures risk for a living, an irony that doesn't escape me now, and I chose an apartment with wide windows because light felt like a promise. Bryce came into my life at a conference reception 2 years ago. Tall and quick with names, the sort of man who remembered a waiter's joke and repeated it better. He told me he admired how calm I was under pressure, that I steadied a room. I told myself it was nice to be seen. We looked good together, and sometimes good is blinding. He had a way of entering a place as if he belonged there before his coat even hit the chair, and people wanted to stand close to that certainty. I liked watching the room open for him. He was younger than me, not by much, and still working toward the salary he believed would prove something to somebody, though he never said who. I took care of the easy things, the spare key on a hook, groceries waiting in the fridge. The rent split that slid a little heavier to my side when a commission fell through. It all felt temporary, the way you tell yourself a rainy week is temporary. And in the meantime, we took pictures, holiday sweaters, rooftop sunsets, a hand on a railing that looked like trust. If you'd asked me then about our differences, I would have said they balanced us. I liked mornings and a quiet kitchen. He liked late nights and warm rooms, thrumming with voices, and there's room in a life for both. His phone lived face down on the counter during dinner because he said it was respectful, and I accepted it for the gesture it was supposed to be. He had a mentor named Zara who believed in opening doors, and I believed in women who pulled others up, so I told myself to be proud of the company he kept. When he stayed out for networking, I pictured business cards and big talk over watered drinks, not the blur of neon or the way selfies tighten the space between two people. Harmony, when it's thin, carries sound differently. It makes small noises stand out. I began to notice how Bryce's voice changed when certain names came up. How praise, for me, landed softer in private than gratitude sounded in public. I told myself it was the season we were in, that everyone coasted now and then when work pressed and sleep ran short. The truth is, I didn't want to interrogate a good-looking picture. I wanted it to be what it had promised when the paint was still wet and the frames were straight. The first tension didn't arrive like an accusation. It wandered in at midnight with perfume still clinging to someone else's hair. I was out with coworkers at a lounge where the bass hummed low enough to make your ribs feel it, lime and vodka in the air, and laughter balancing on the edge of sloppy. Naomi found me near the bar, eyeliner smudged heels clicking unevenly, her smile too bright to be friendly. She leaned close, as if to kiss my cheek, her breath warm with gin, and whispered 5 words that would split the year clean in half. He calls you his plan B. The words, Naomi whispered, clung to me like smoke. I couldn't clear from my lungs. I left the lounge early, my heels echoing on the wet sidewalk, and walked home with her voice still circling in my head. Plan B. Retirement plan. The safe option. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were trembling so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could open the door. I tried to sleep, but every sound from the street felt amplified, every shadow in the room like a reminder of what she had said. By morning, exhaustion sat heavy on me, but so did a sharper kind of awareness. For months, I had let things slide, the late nights that always stretched longer than they should, the phone turned face down during dinner, the perfume that wasn't mine clinging to his jacket. I had told myself it was work, that Bryce was just ambitious, that networking required charm and long hours. But Naomi's drunken confession left me no room to pretend. I knew I had to look for the truth. I started where most people leave digital footprints: social media. On Bryce's profile, everything looked curated, polished, as if his life were an advertisement for success. But I dug deeper, scrolling through the posts where he had been tagged by friends' photos he never thought I would notice. There she was, Zara, in nearly every frame. Rooftop parties, neon-lit dance floors, laughing at jokes that didn't look professional at all. His arm was always around her shoulder, her hand brushing against his sleeve. The images hit me like small blows, confirming what I had tried so hard to dismiss. It wasn't just pictures. It was the comments, the private jokes among his friends. Memes about starter girlfriends and forever wives that made my stomach tighten. At first, I thought maybe I was reading too much into them, but then I found a video posted late one night on Naomi's page. I knew Bryce's voice, immediately slurred with drink and arrogance, saying, "Camille will buy us a house one day. Until then, a man's got to live." The laughter that followed cut sharper than any words. I sat frozen with my phone in my hand, replaying the sound until I finally forced myself to hit record and save it. In the days that followed, I became someone I hardly recognized. Outwardly, I was the same. I laughed at Bryce's jokes, asked about his meetings, kissed him goodnight. Inwardly, I felt like a stranger standing in my own life, hollow, but burning with a new kind of resolve. I began collecting everything: screenshots, saved posts, recordings. I wasn't going to confront him without proof. Bryce thrived on confidence and charm. If I spoke without evidence, he would make me doubt myself. I couldn't let that happen. One evening, he came home later than usual. His tie loosened his jacket, carrying the unmistakable scent of expensive perfume. I asked softly how his night had gone. "Just networking, babe," he said, with that practiced smile, reaching for the water I set on the counter. I nodded, though my eyes stayed on the way he gripped his phone tightly, as if it might reveal something. When he turned away, I whispered into the dark, "I'm watching now." The tension in our apartment grew with every passing day. Bryce's 27th birthday was approaching, and he planned for it like a man staging a coronation. He rented out an entire restaurant, ordered a 3-tier cake, and sent invitations to 60 people. "This party is going to be legendary, Camille," he kept saying, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. "Don't screw it up." His words stung, not because I cared about his opinion anymore, but because he assumed I was still the woman who would carry his plans without question. He had no idea that I was preparing my own script. While Bryce obsessed over details, I rehearsed silence. I pictured the clinking of glasses, the crowd waiting for my words, and the moment I would finally show him and everyone else the truth. I stored files in hidden folders on my laptop, naming them innocuously so he'd never notice. Each night, I opened them before bed, scrolling through his arrogance until my anger hardened into resolve. The betrayal still hurt, but the clarity gave me strength I hadn't felt before. There were moments when the weight of it almost broke me. One night, after Bryce had left for another so-called networking dinner, I sat at our kitchen table staring at a photo of us from Christmas. We looked like the perfect couple, me in a red sweater, him in a navy blazer, both smiling as if the world was ours. I whispered to the empty room, "How could you?" My voice cracked, and for a moment, I wanted nothing more than to pack a bag and leave quietly. But I knew him too well. If I walked away in silence, he would rewrite the story. He would tell people I was jealous, insecure, unable to handle his success. No, if I left, I needed to take the truth with me, and I needed everyone to see it. 3 nights before the party, I overheard him in the living room, his voice low and playful on the phone. I stayed in the hallway listening as he said, "No, babe, she's clueless. The party's just for show. Of course I'll be there after. You know you're the only one I want." My chest tightened as I realized who he was talking to. Zara. He hung up moments later, walked into the kitchen, and kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. "Big night's almost here, Cam," he said cheerfully. My throat was dry, but I managed to smile. I know I told him. It'll be unforgettable. That night I lay awake picturing it all in my mind. The chandeliers glowing, the laughter of guests, Bryce basking in admiration, and me rising to speak. I imagined the silence that would fall when I told the truth. For the first time since Naomi's drunken confession, I felt something more than anger. I felt anticipation. The day of his birthday arrived, golden lights strung across the restaurant he had spent weeks obsessing over. 60 guests filled the space, glasses clinking, cameras flashing, and Zara in a red dress that drew eyes the way fire does. Bryce moved through the room like a man convinced the world was his. He thanked colleagues, charmed family, and whispered to me, "Don't forget your speech. Make me proud." I met his gaze and smiled softly. "Oh, I won't forget." He didn't hear the edge in my voice. He never did. And as I stood there, the music swelling and the guests gathering, I knew the moment was finally close. The night that was supposed to crown him would also be the night I tore the mask away. And in that thought, I felt steady. Because if Bryce believed I was his plan B, he was about to learn what it felt like when a backup plan became the end of the game. The chandeliers above glowed warm, the sound of silverware fading as Bryce tapped his glass and delivered his toast. He thanked his colleagues, his family, and of course Zara, pausing long enough to send her a grin that tightened my chest. Then he turned to me, smiling wide, telling the room that I always gave the best speeches. And now it was my turn. Applause rippled politely, and every eye shifted to me. I stood slowly feeling the weight of 60 stares, but finding my knees steady. I raised my glass, letting the quiet stretch across the room. To new beginnings, I began, my voice calm but clear. Bryce's smile grew wider, expecting praise he had rehearsed in his mind. But I didn't give it. I told them the truth. I spoke of the words Naomi had let slip, the cruel nickname Bryce used for me when I wasn't around, Plan B, the safe option, the woman he'd keep as a backup when his fun was over. The air in the restaurant shifted, the chatter replaced with silence heavy enough to hear glasses clink as hands trembled. Faces turned toward him, toward Zara, toward me. I pulled out my phone, offering to play the recordings of his arrogance, the video where he bragged about me buying him a house one day. His mother's lips pressed into a thin line, while his father leaned forward as though ready to stop me. I didn't waver. Bryce's face hardened, his voice low with anger as he accused me of humiliating him. I told him plainly he had done that to himself, that I was only showing people what he had chosen to hide. I slid a small box across the table, neatly wrapped, containing a book about living authentically. "Happy birthday," I said softly, and then I left. The cool night air rushed against my skin like a release, and I didn't look back. My phone lit up in the taxi, one message after another flooding in, first rage, then bargaining, then threats. By morning, there were over 100. I answered only once, telling him he had 30 days to collect his things with a witness present. Then I blocked him. For the first time in months, my apartment was quiet, though the silence still carried the echo of his voice. 2 days later, the pounding at my door began. Bryce and his sister Chloe stood outside with 3 of his friends rattling the knob, shouting my name, even trying to pry the window open with a card. My neighbors called in alarm, but I had already prepared. The new Ring camera captured every second his hoarse shouting Chloe's red hands as she fought with the window, one of his friends muttering they should leave. Bryce snapped that I owed him. I saved the footage and sent it straight to a lawyer. That night, I sat on the couch and watched the recording. Instead of fear, I felt something colder, a steady realization. This wasn't love unraveling. It was control slipping from his hands. When Zara reached out to me days later with a message about how cruel I'd been, I attached screenshots of Bryce texting her late at night while lying in bed beside me. Her response was a flimsy excuse before she blocked me. His mother called my parents, dripping with disdain, claiming I had ruined her son's life. My mother listened quietly and then said, "Sounds like Camille finally grew a spine." Good for her before hanging up. Still, Bryce kept circling. He made new accounts, sent fresh waves of messages, some filled with rage, others with desperate pleas. He posted on Facebook painting himself as the victim of a manipulative girlfriend who had left him destitute. But his friends remembered the party. They commented reminding him that I had paid the rent, that he had called me Plan B in front of everyone. Within hours, he deleted the post, unable to control the story anymore. When a note appeared on my door in his handwriting, begging for one more chance, I crumpled it without reading twice. My locks were secure. My proof filed, my resolve unshaken. Yet I couldn't shake the unease, the thought of what he might do next. I printed the Ring footage, stored the texts, and kept every scrap of evidence close. I wasn't afraid, but I was cautious. Because men like Bryce didn't let go quietly. Each night, I told myself the same truth: he hadn't loved me. Not really. He had loved the safety I gave him, the comfort of knowing I would always catch him when he fell. Now that I had stepped aside, he was free-falling, and I wasn't reaching out. When my friend Lena came over one evening with takeout and wine, she studied me for a long moment. "You look lighter," she said, handing me a glass. I admitted I felt lighter too, though the tension still lingered under my skin. She grinned and clinked her glass against mine. "Good, because from where I'm standing, Bryce looks ready to self-destruct. And honestly, I can't wait to watch." Her laughter filled my kitchen, warm and easy, but deep down, I knew she was right. Bryce wasn't finished, not yet. His rage had been loud, his desperation constant. But men like him didn't fade quietly into the background. He would try again, and the next time it might be something more reckless. And as I cleared the dishes that night, I felt the stillness of my apartment and understood it for what it was, not peace, but the pause before another storm. It was nearly 3 a.m. when the chime from the Ring camera jolted me awake. My heart hammered as I reached for my phone, the blue light filling the dark room. On the screen, Bryce stood on my porch with a hood pulled low, a crowbar glinting in his hands. He muttered to himself as he jammed it against the doorframe, sweat dripping down his temple. "This is my place too." "I have rights," he hissed. My fingers shook as I called the police, whispering the address, while watching him rage against a lock he could no longer claim. The officers arrived quickly, their flashlights cutting through the dark. They caught him mid-swing the camera, capturing every detail. One officer shook his head, his voice calm but firm, telling Bryce he was on camera attempting a break-in. Bryce's mask cracked, then his sobs spilling out as he insisted I had thrown him out unfairly, that he was the victim. The officers weren't moved. They reminded him the lease was in my name, the eviction notice was clear, and there was nothing left tying him to this home. He left, humiliated, shouting over his shoulder that it wasn't over. The next morning, I received a fraud alert from my bank. Someone had tried to access my account using my social security number, my birthday, even my mother's maiden name. I knew instantly who it was. What Bryce didn't know was that I had never answered security questions truthfully. He had typed in Buddy, the name I once told him was my first pet. The real answer was Sergeant Whiskers, a white cat from my childhood. The attempt was flagged immediately, and I froze. My accounts changed every password and filed a report. It wasn't just pettiness, now it was desperation. Days later, his mother called again, her voice syrupy and rehearsed. "Camille," she said, "let's be adults. Bryce made mistakes, yes, but you're not innocent either. It's only fair you help him transition." I held the phone tight, listening as she suggested I give him $3,000. She would contribute $500, she explained, so it would feel like a compromise. My jaw clenched as I asked if she realized she was asking me to bankroll his new start after he tried to break into my apartment. She bristled and snapped that I was being selfish. I ended the call before my voice betrayed how furious I was. The peak of his entitlement came one Thursday evening when I pulled into the parking lot and saw a moving truck idling near my building. 3 men carried dollies while Bryce stood with a clipboard barking orders like he owned the place. "We're here for the furniture," he told me smoothly when I walked up. "My furniture, the couch, the bed, the TV. I stared at him incredulous, then asked if he meant the items I had bought, the ones with receipts in my name. He insisted that choosing them made them his. The movers exchanged wary glances, clearly uncomfortable. I pulled out a folder I had prepared weeks ago, every receipt neatly in order. One by one, I showed them the couch, the bed, even the coffee maker. "All purchased by me with my card in my name," I said quietly. One of the movers scratched his neck and muttered, "Sir, we can't take this stuff. She's got proof." Bryce's face twisted, his voice rising as he told them to do their job. But they shook their heads, apologized to me, and packed up. Bryce spat words at me as they left, insisting I was nothing without him, that he had made me better. I stepped closer and asked him why, if that were true, he had called me Plan B. For the first time, he was speechless. Headlights swept across the lot, then, and Zara appeared in heels far too tall for the cracked pavement. "Come on, baby," she called gently, her voice meant to soothe. Bryce sneered, then climbed into her car. They drove away, his glare burning through the tinted window. I stood in the quiet lot, the air cool against my skin, knowing that whatever thread tied us together had finally snapped. The next day, a mutual friend called me in disbelief. Bryce's boss had heard every word of my speech at the party, and the story had spread through the firm like wildfire. He had skipped work, probably hiding while his reputation crumbled. "They're saying he embarrassed the company," my friend whispered. "He might not have a job much longer." I hung up and sat in the stillness of my apartment, a strange mix of relief and sorrow washing over me. Watching someone unravel wasn't the victory I had once imagined. Still, the updates kept coming. Bryce had moved in with Zara, but her parents' home wasn't built to handle his chaos. He tried to charm them, then argued when they set boundaries, sneaking out at odd hours, spinning excuses. It wasn't long before Patricia, Zara's mother, sent me a message of her own. "He's already become our problem," she wrote. "Good riddance." I stared at the words for a long moment before setting the phone down. For the first time, pity almost stirred in me, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Patricia was right. Bryce was no longer my problem. Yet even as his life collapsed around him, he circled back toward mine. He sent Tiffany, a mutual acquaintance, to my gym. She climbed onto the treadmill beside me, panting dramatically before leaning over. "You know Bryce is struggling," she said. "He's barely eating, sleeping on couches. Could you maybe help him out?" I pulled out one earbud and told her calmly that Wendy's was hiring. her face twisted in shock before she stormed off, leaving me to finish my run in peace. But Bryce wasn't done. He turned to theatrics, launching a GoFundMe campaign with a photo of himself and Zara cropped close. The headline begged for help, claiming he had been trapped in a toxic relationship where I drained him financially before leaving him destitute. He asked for $10,000 to rebuild his life. I laughed until tears ran down my face, but the internet did what it always does. His co-workers and even former friends flooded the comments, reminding him of the birthday speech, the rent I had paid, the arrogance he had displayed. Within hours, the campaign stalled at $75, all donated by his aunt and an old college buddy. By evening, he deleted it in shame. For me, the silence in my apartment grew easier. I cooked meals for one, watered the plants, and let the windows stay open longer. Yet beneath the calm, I could feel something else stirring. Bryce had lost his footing, his job, and soon even Zara's patience. And when men like him began to fall, they often tried to drag someone else down with them. As I set my phone down one night after reading yet another message from a mutual friend, I knew the storm wasn't over. His world was shrinking, his options thinning, and I could almost sense the recklessness that would come next. The quiet I enjoyed was only temporary. The pause before he made his final desperate move. The night Zara threw his clothes into black garbage bags and left them on the lawn, I thought it might finally be the end. Rain slicked the pavement, and neighbors peeked through curtains as Bryce shouted and begged, his voice rising until it cracked. He tried every tactic: charm, threats, pitiful sobs, but Zara kept her door locked. I watched the scene unfold later through a friend's video, her camera steady, while he stood drenched, furious, and unwanted. Hours passed before he gave up, calling me from an unfamiliar number close to midnight. His voice was ragged when I answered. "Camille, it's me. I need you." She kicked me out. "I'm outside in the rain with nowhere else to go." I listened in silence, my chest tight with both anger and clarity. He had called me Plan B, tried to break into my home, even attempted to steal from me, and now he wanted me to save him. "Anywhere but here." "Bryce," I said flatly and ended the call. The next morning, a friend sent me a screenshot of his social media. A black screen with white text read, "Toxic exes never let you go." The comments came fast. People reminded him of the party, of the rent, of the arrogance he had shown. Within hours, he deleted his account again. It was no longer just my word against his. The people around us had seen too much. In the weeks that followed, I heard fragments of his unraveling. He drifted from one relative's couch to another, each stay shorter than the last. One cousin refused to lend him money, an aunt told him bluntly to grow up. Still, he spun stories painting me as the villain, and sometimes they reached me through whispers from mutual friends. I didn't respond. Silence had become my shield, and it was stronger than any defense. Then came Patricia, Zara's mother. Her voice was firmer this time when she called. "Camille, you should know what he's been telling Zara. He claims you're stalking him, harassing him, trying to win him back. He even showed fake text threads." My stomach tightened as she explained how he had messaged himself from a burner phone, pretending I had written those words. For a while, Zara believed him, but Patricia had checked their cameras, seen him sneaking out at night, meeting other women, including Zara's best friend. The truth had surfaced again. That night, Zara threw him out for the second time, the same garbage bags left curbside under a drizzle that seemed to follow him everywhere. Hours later, the phone rang again. His voice was broken, pleading, "Please, Camille, I need a place to stay. I made mistakes, but I didn't mean them. I was hurt." I let him talk until the desperation turned into a whine. Then I told him quietly, "We broke up because you lied, cheated, and humiliated me. I won't be anyone's backup plan." I hung up before he could answer. The next morning, another post appeared online, this time with a filtered selfie and the caption, "Some people destroy your life over one stupid comment." The replies came swiftly, reminders of his own words, his own actions. By midday, the account was gone. For me, the silence that followed was different. My apartment felt lighter. I cooked without glancing at my phone, walked through the city without bracing for confrontation. I began to climb again, something I had loved years before, but abandoned when Bryce complained about how long it took. At the gym, my hands grew calloused, my arms steadier as I pulled myself higher each week. That's where I met Jenna, a woman with an easy laugh and steady eyes. On our first date, she leaned across the table and smirked. "Just so you know, Camille, you're nobody's plan B in my book, and what you did at his party legendary." I laughed then, a laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. For the first time in months, maybe years, the sound belonged entirely to me. Sometimes I thought about Bryce not with rage or pity, but with recognition. He had been the lesson I needed, the one that taught me love, without respect, isn't love at all. And as I closed my apartment windows one quiet evening, the city lights glowing against the glass, I realized the best revenge hadn't been my toast at his birthday, though it had been unforgettable. The best revenge was simpler, stepping back, refusing to catch him, and letting him fall into the consequences he had built for himself. I knew his story wasn't finished, not yet. Men like Bryce never stopped clawing for control, and I could sense he would try one last desperate move before the truth buried him completely. The quiet weeks that followed should have felt like relief, but instead they hummed with tension, as though I was waiting for something to crack. Bryce had lost his job, his social circle, and even Zara's patience, but men like him rarely surrendered quietly. I started to notice the signs in small, unsettling ways: a new number lighting up my phone in the middle of the night, an envelope slipped under my door with no return address, a shadow that lingered outside my building before slipping away when I looked out the window. One Tuesday evening, I came home to find a folded note taped to the door in his messy handwriting. The words were desperate, almost frantic. "Camille, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Just let me in one night, one chance." I stood there in the hallway, staring at it until my neighbor's door creaked open. Mrs. Alvarez, a widowed woman in her 70s, peered out with concern. "He's been circling around here again," she whispered. I nodded, thanked her for looking out, and peeled the note from the door before crumpling it into my bag. The locks I'd changed still held, but his persistence made it clear he wasn't finished. A few nights later, I woke to the ring chime at 3 a.m. I pulled up the feed, and there he was again, hood drawn low, a crowbar glinting, as he muttered angrily to himself. "This is my place. I have rights," he repeated like a mantra while jamming the metal into the frame. My breath caught as I dialed the police, describing what I was watching on the screen. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, their flashlights catching him mid-swing. One of them laughed in disbelief, telling him calmly that breaking into a home while on camera wasn't exactly wise. I watched from my window as Bryce's bravado dissolved into sobs. He insisted I had thrown him into the street, that I had ruined his life, that he was only trying to reclaim what was his. The officers reminded him the lease had always been in my name, the eviction notice was official, and nothing tied him to my apartment anymore. When they led him away, his eyes lifted toward my window, dark with fury, and I understood that humiliation only fueled him further. The very next day, my phone buzzed with a fraud alert from the bank. Someone had tried to access my accounts using my personal details. I knew immediately it was Bryce. He typed in my birth date, my social security number, even my mother's maiden name, all things I had once shared with him without hesitation. But he didn't know I had never answered the security questions truthfully. He guessed Buddy, the name I had told him was my first pet, when in reality it had been Sergeant Whiskers, a white cat I adored as a child. His attempt failed, flagged immediately, and I spent the morning freezing my accounts and filing another police report. By the end of the week, his desperation grew louder. His mother, Carol Nolan, called with a voice dripping in practiced sweetness. "Camille, dear, can't we be reasonable? Bryce made mistakes, but you've been cruel. It's only fair you help him get back on his feet." I held the phone tight, letting her go on about how he had given me 2 years of his life and how a clean break required generosity. When she finally got to the point asking me to give him $3,000, while she would add $500 as a show of support, I nearly laughed. "So you want me to pay 6 times your contribution to fund his new start?" I asked evenly. She bristled, insisting it was a compromise. I ended the call before my anger could spill over. Not long after another spectacle unfolded. I pulled into the parking lot one evening to find a moving truck idling in front of my building. 3 men were unloading dollies while Bryce stood with a clipboard directing them with false authority. When he saw me, his smile was cold. "We're here for the furniture," he said smoothly. I asked which furniture, and he listed the couch, the bed, the television, everything I had bought myself. "I picked them out," he snapped, as if that made them his. The movers glanced uneasily between us, clearly aware of the tension. I opened the folder I had prepared weeks earlier and laid out each receipt, my name and card printed clearly. One by one, I showed them proof of ownership. "She's got documentation," one mover muttered to the others. "We can't touch this." Bryce's face twisted, his voice rising as he demanded they do their job, but the men shook their heads and began loading their equipment back into the truck. His words turned venomous then. "You're nothing without me," he spat, his voice cracking with rage. "You were a nobody before I made you better." I stepped closer, my tone cold. "If you made me better, Bryce, why did you call me Plan B?" For the first time, his mouth went silent, his eyes flashing before twisting into a sneer. "Because you weren't even Plan A material," he hissed. Before I could respond, headlights swept into the lot. Zara's car pulled up and she stepped out, her heels clicking against the cracked pavement. "Come on, baby," she called, her voice soft but sharp enough to carry. "He's not worth it." Bryce glared at me one last time before climbing into her car, the door slamming behind him. I watched them drive away, the sound of the truck's engine fading into the night. Later, a mutual friend from his firm called to tell me the story had reached his workplace. The speech at his birthday, the video recordings, even the moving truck debacle everyone knew. His boss was there. "Camille?" the friend whispered. "They're saying he embarrassed the company. He won't last much longer." I listened quietly, my hands folded in my lap. Watching him unravel like this wasn't satisfying. It was sobering. He had built his entire life on arrogance and backup plans, and now both had crumbled. Still, I knew better than to think it was over. Bryce had lost nearly everything that gave him status, his job, his home, even the sympathy of those closest to him. But the look he gave me that night in the parking lot, filled with venom and humiliation, told me something important. He wasn't finished. He was only waiting for the next chance to lash out. And as I closed my blinds and set the folder of receipts back in its drawer, I felt a steady awareness settle over me. The storm he carried wasn't over. It was circling. And soon it would break again. The week after the moving truck incident, I heard nothing from Bryce. At first, the silence unsettled me. He had always been loud in his anger, filling the space with threats and demands, but now there was nothing. I went about my routines, carefully keeping my blinds drawn, checking the locks twice before bed. The absence of his chaos made my apartment feel weightless, but it was the kind of stillness that made you brace for the sound of glass breaking. It didn't take long for word to reach me. A co-worker of his, someone who had been at the party months earlier, sent me a message with a link. Bryce had launched a GoFundMe campaign, the headline claiming he was escaping financial abuse. My name wasn't mentioned, but his story painted me in broad, damning strokes: the manipulative partner who drained him, the cold woman who left him with nothing. He asked for $10,000 to rebuild his life. I scrolled past the smiling photo of him and Zara cropped close to suggest happiness and shook my head. But the internet can be merciless when the truth is already out. Comments piled beneath his post almost instantly. "Didn't you call her Plan B at your own birthday?" one wrote. Another chimed in, "We were there. Stop rewriting history." Within hours, the donations stalled at $75, all from his aunt and an old college buddy. By the end of the evening, the page was gone, scrubbed away like so many of his failed performances. 2 days later, another message found me. A mutual friend whispered that Bryce's firm had asked him to resign. His boss had witnessed my speech at the party, and the story of his arrogance had circulated too widely to ignore. They said he embarrassed the company, my friend admitted. I imagined Bryce slouched on Zara's parents' couch, the job he once bragged about reduced to nothing more than a bitter memory. Yet even in his unraveling, he clung to the fantasy of control. I learned through Patricia, Zara's mother, that his behavior had grown unbearable under their roof. He snuck out at odd hours, muttering excuses when confronted. Patricia caught it first on their Ring camera, the footage of him slipping into the night, sometimes returning with perfume that wasn't Zara's. At first, Zara defended him, insisting her mother was jealous and controlling. But the truth arrived in the form of her best friend, who confessed that Bryce had been sending her private messages asking to meet alone, flattering her with the same lines he once used on me. The implosion was quick. One rainy evening, Patricia stood by as Zara tossed Bryce's clothes into black garbage bags and dragged them onto the lawn. Neighbors peeked through curtains as he begged, then threatened, then begged again. The bags grew soaked under the downpour while Zara locked the door. He screamed for an hour before calling me again from an unfamiliar number. "Camille," he croaked, his voice wet and strained. "Please, I need you." She kicked me out. "I'm standing in the rain. I have nowhere to go." I listened in silence, his words tumbling over themselves, his desperation palpable. I remembered the night he had called me Plan B. The arrogance in his laughter, the crowbar glinting under the porch light. "Bryce," I said quietly, "we ended because you lied, cheated, and mocked me. I won't be anyone's backup plan. Not yours. Not ever." I hung up my hands, steady. The following morning, my phone lit with screenshots. Bryce had posted another late-night rant on social media, a black screen with white text declaring, "Toxic exes never let you go." The comments were swift and brutal. "Didn't she dump you at your birthday?" one asked. Another wrote, "You're literally homeless, bro. Team Camille." By sunrise, his account was gone again. I watched from the sidelines as his life collapsed piece by piece. He drifted from one couch to another, begging favors from family and friends, until their patience wore thin. His mother called again this time, not to demand money, but to lament what I had done to her son. Her voice quivered as she told me he was a broken man. I let her speak, then ended the call without reply. I had no more energy to lend to his stories. The strangest message came not from family or friends, but from Patricia herself. One afternoon, she sent a text that simply read, "You were right about him. He's already become our burden. Good riddance." I stared at those words, the validation from a woman who had once dismissed me, and felt a kind of quiet finality settle in. Bryce wasn't my responsibility anymore. Yet even as his world shrank, I knew it wasn't the last I'd hear of him. His pride had always been too loud, his need for control too consuming. I sensed he would try again, one last reckless act before the fall was complete. and as I placed my phone face down on the table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in my kitchen, I understood that peace was coming. But before it arrived, the storm that was Bryce Nolan would strike one final time. Bryce's final collapse was not dramatic, not the explosion of rage I had braced myself for. It came quietly, the way threads give way one by one, until there's nothing left to hold. He drifted back to his parents' house, moving into the spare bedroom he once mocked, and took a data entry job at his father's insurance office. His mother painted him as a victim to anyone who would listen, but the story she tried to spin never carried far. Too many people had seen the truth for themselves. The image he had once worked so hard to protect had already unraveled in public. For me, life slowly settled into something gentler. The silence in my apartment no longer felt like waiting for glass to break. It felt like peace. I went back to the climbing gym, finding strength in the burn of my arms as I pulled myself higher each week. That's where I met Jenna with her calloused hands and laughter that came as easily as sunlight through clouds. On our first date, she leaned forward and said with a smile, "Camille, you're nobody's backup plan in my book." For the first time in years, I laughed without heaviness pressing behind it. Sometimes I thought back to the woman I was before Naomi's words cracked my world open, the one who excused the late nights, ignored the hints, and believed being steady meant being silent. That version of me had needed to learn that love without respect is not love at all. It is a kind of slow erasure where you trade your worth for someone else's comfort. I promised myself I would never make that trade again. The best revenge was not my speech at his birthday, though that night showed me how steady I could be. The best revenge was choosing to step back, refusing to be his safety net, and letting the consequences of his choices finally catch him. When Plan B walks away, the person who thought they could always rely on it is forced to face the fall alone. Justice didn't look like courtroom battles or dramatic headlines. It looked like the truth surfacing in living rooms, offices, and neighborhood whispers. It looked like me standing taller, no longer weighed down by the need to prove myself to someone who never truly saw me. Dignity was not something he could take, no matter how hard he tried. Now when I sit by the window in the evening, the light spilling across the floor, I feel a calm I once thought I had to earn. It is simply mine, steady and quiet, and it reminds me that resilience doesn't roar. Sometimes it just breathes and keeps going. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey stayed with you most. Share your thoughts if you'd like, and if stories like this bring you comfort, you're welcome to stay connected here.